Okay, so welcome to video number 5. Let's determine what the software does. So once you figured out what the big problem is going to solve, it's time to figure out how it will do it in more detail. So in the previous video, we figured out what the solution was, basically how frustrated your consumer would be with the problem and how happy they would be with the problem solved. So now we need to dig deeper further and create what we call a to-do list. And if you've created grocery lists, to-do lists, then creating software specifications is actually very, very similar. And it's actually a very easy thing to do once you have figured out what kind of problem it'll solve and how it will go about doing that. And that's what we're going to do in this particular video. Now, the way to create software is to create a sequential and logical flow. So it's not going to be just a randomized grocery list. It's going to be a sequential logical flow. So whatever you do in the beginning is going to impact the end. And it'll make more sense in just a second. So in other words, if, let's say, for example, if a user clicks a button, you're going to write down what happens. If the user takes a specific action, then what happens? If the user does not take that action, then what happens? So you're really going to have to figure out basically all the steps of the process. And then what happens if this happened, then this happened. If this does not happen, then this does not happen. Or if this does not happen, what happens? So it's kind of like the if and else statements. It's a logical, if this happens, then that happens. So it's kind of like a cause and effect, essentially. If I drop this ball, then the ball bounces, right? If I throw the ball at the wall, then the ball either bounces to the left or the right. But in this case, you're going to know exactly where the ball falls if you're going to be able to develop the software correct. So let me actually look deeper. Let's take an example, and I'm going to show you how this is all going to work so it makes sense to you. Okay, so back to where we left off in the previous video. What we're going to do now is we are going to break down the list of possible solutions. So we already figured out that the problem was creating fresh content on an ongoing basis. Now what we're going to do is we are going to take the list of possible solutions right here, which is finds hot content that is curated from other people's sites and maybe places it on the WordPress post or the page. So let's write that down. So finds hot content that is curated. Let's say break it down here. So basically what we're trying to do here is we're trying to figure out the process. Whether you go out on YouTube and you watch a video and you figure out the step-by-step process, what happens behind the scenes, what it does, what the user does to have to interact with the software for it to do such a thing. And you're not going to get everything perfect, but if you find a good programmer, they're going to be able to fill it between the gaps. You're going to be able to figure out what they need to do. What we're trying to do is we're trying to do as much legwork as possible to make it easy for the programmer. All right, so first we need to have a tool and a WordPress plugin where maybe somebody enters a topic or a keyword. So let's say user enters something like I'll put brackets around it, topics, keywords, something. And then the plugin needs to do something next. So obviously, if you go to Google, for example, and let me break it down. If we go to Google, the user obviously goes to Google. Now, the user essentially can be the plugin. So the plugin goes to Google, then it takes the keyword and the topic, and then it enters it into Google, for example. So let's say we're looking for some hot topics such as kidney stone solutions. All right, so let's just put that here. And so we have that here. So the machine comes here, they look through, and they try to find hot content. Now, the question that we need to figure out is what is considered hot topics or hot content. It may not necessarily be something that is ranked up here, right? So how do we know if it is hot content or not? Well, one way to figuring out, especially within Google, is when you type in something like kidney stone treatment. You see how Google suggests certain topics and all that? So we know these are hot topics because Google suggests these. In order for these to actually get in here, this basically means that tons and tons of people are typing these in. All right. So maybe we can have a WordPress plugin that goes to Google, we type that keyword in, and it tries to fill in the rest. So maybe it grabs the Google Suggests keywords right here. And then from that, it gives you a list of keywords. All right. So in this case, we can say kidney stone. And then if somebody types that in, it grabs these in here. So let me write that down here. Okay. So user enters topics and keywords. Let's say user goes to Google, and I'm going to rewrite this in a minute, but let's just make it simple. User goes to Google, user enters topics and keywords. Google gives a list of suggested keywords, suggestions. And the normal process is that the user, copies the top 10 suggested keywords. So what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to break it down to what the user does. Don't worry about what the plugin does yet. We're going to do all that in just a minute. So user goes to Google, they type in the keyword, then Google gives a list of keywords. So you're telling us what the machine does and the user does. User copies the top 10 keywords, and then maybe the user goes to, let's say, Facebook or some blog site, maybe Blogger, or let's say, we'll just call this user goes to popular blog directory. User then types in the top 10 suggested keywords, and then user finds hot content. And normally the user would link hot content to the blog. And that's basically the process of finding hot content. So that's the process right here. It's a step-by-step process. See, it's kind of like a grocery list, but it's kind of not in a certain way. It's a sequential, logical, step-by-step process. So if you think about something easier, like baking a cake. So if you look at a recipe, you see that the recipe tells you step-by-step what you need to do. So you need to gather the items. Typically you need to preheat the oven, and then you need to mix in the dry materials before you mix in the eggs and all of that. So there's actually a process to all of this, right? And that's what you're really trying to figure out, is the whole process. Don't worry about the if and else statements yet. Let's just get this done. Okay, so the next thing I normally do is I take this information here, and I'm going to leave that up at the top, but I'm going to make a brand new copy and paste here. So you see everything from here to here. And we'll call this WordPress plugin versus the user. So now what we're trying to do is we're trying to write what the process is, and then we're trying to translate that into how the WordPress plugin acts and how the user acts. Okay, so starting from the beginning again. User goes to Google. Now, in this case, the user is going to have to stay inside of the WordPress plugin. They're not going to be able to leave or anything like that. We're going to want them to be able to click a button and it all happens. All right. So user goes to WordPress plugin after they have activated it. And then the user enters maybe a keyword. All right. Now, obviously, they're still going to have to go to Google, right? But the user's not going to go to Google or any outside sites. That's the WordPress plugin's job, right? So the WordPress plugin, we're just going to call it plugin. Plugin goes to Google and then enters that keyword that the user just typed in. Now, Google gives a list of those suggested keywords, and then the plugin copies those top 10 suggested keywords. Then the plugin goes to the popular blog directory, whatever that we specify later. You could even tell the programmer, hey, I want these lists of, links or directories. And then the user types in the top 10 suggested keywords. Now, in this case, the plugin is doing everything. Typically what happens is the user just enters a keyword and then the plugin does the rest. So the plugin types in the top 10 suggested keywords. Plugin shows shows a list of the hot content. User sees the list and chooses. Then the plugin copies a link of the hot content to the WordPress blog. So this takes somewhat of a practice, but that's why I'm showing you the step-by-step process. So first things first, you go through here, you list it out, then you reorganize it. And then if you notice, what I'm trying to do is I'm just showing what the user sees. So the user goes to the WordPress plugin, they enter a keyword, but then when it times to go outside, the plugin goes and does the rest, and then it pretty much finds the content for us. So really what the user only sees in this case is they're seeing the WordPress plugin, they enter the keyword, they click enter, and then as they're waiting, the plugin shows the hot content and they immediately see the hot content, because a human ultimately is going to have to decide what content is best for them. Now, you could make it automated if you want, and you say plugin sees a list of content and then chooses it based on certain criteria, and then it spits it out. It's all automatic. You can do that. But at the end of the day, you have to pick and choose what is the user going to do as a human, and then what does the plugin do as a machine, and how smart should that machine be. So pretty much that's it. Now, we could go further and we could do if and else statements. So we can go back here and say if the user goes, well, obviously the user is going to go to the plugin. So if we go down here, it says user enters keyword. We could say if the user enters a keyword, do this. Now, obviously, if the user does not enter a keyword, nothing happens. So we don't need that. But if there was a different path or a different option, we could do that as well. So if a user enters a keyword, then we take them on a progression. And I'll show you more about that in the visual map later. But we can say if that happens, then the plugin does this, then this, then this, then this, then this, and then this. Then if user sees a list and chooses, then this. Now obviously, if user does nothing, then nothing happens. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Most of the time that's the case. So we're pretty much done now. That's all we need to do. And if this seems a little complicated, I'm just going to say and put it out there that this does take time. You need to get a hang of it. You could even go about going out and just writing things that you normally do day to day, like brushing your teeth and all of that. And try to get a hang of it first before you actually move forward with this process. It does take time because I am trying to teach you from a programmer to a newbie. So it does take time. So don't worry if you don't get it right the first time, but I'm going to show you how to turn this into a map in the next video.